mean, I was very disappointed that Patrick Harvey and the unofficial group of 5, whatever they're called, Jean Urquhart, Margaret MacDonald. Anyway, they're not allowed a question every week at First Minister's Questions, because Patrick Harvey's always good value, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I tend to think so as well. I'm quite keen on Patrick Harvey, and he's actually quite good on telly. I think he'll be an overwhelmingly positive voice in the Yes campaign. I mean, he's not actually very well known if you look at his polling numbers in terms of the punters and the public, but those do know him tend to have quite a favourable view of him, and you can see why, because he's actually a very good performer. He comes off through his kind of appearances on telly. He was on Newsnight this week, and he was quite prominent in the same-sex marriage debate because he was willing to go out there and bat for it in the way that, to be honest, few SNP MSPs were. That he can be very kind of calm-headed, level-headed, put the arguments respectfully, but pretty pointedly too. And I'm quite a fan of Patrick Harvey myself.
Yeah.
So how do you agree that independent group, which is apparently now a group in the Parliament, they should get a question? Wee Willie Rennie gets a question 2 weeks out of 3. I mean, can you imagine having Margot every second week getting a question, you know, and then Patrick and Jean Urquhart? I don't know about the other 2.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea.
Yes, why not?
Well,
I mean, I'm all in favour of kind of expanding the number of voices which we hear in our Parliament, and it seems a pity not to kind of recognise even a technical grouping in terms of asking questions. So I'd be up for that, sure.
Well, it is under consideration. I mean, about a month ago we had a tweet up, a number of political bloggers we met in, I forget what it was, in a pub in Edinburgh anyway. Patrick turned up for that. And we asked him about that, and he said, well, apparently the presiding officer is considering the possibility that they could have a regular question. It seems to be, no, there's somebody else I'm not pleased with at all. I'm sorry, I find the presiding officer, I think she is appalling. She can't even control that desk banging nonsense.
Yeah. I think at this point we should probably move on to second topic, but we're still in the Parliament, and there was more desk banging in this. And this is something that I don't know how much of it you saw, but the debate about the Iraq War that was in the Parliament, and it's something, you know, I think a lot of people have a problem with. I was a person who was involved in all those marches and everything. I went on them all, and you know, it was good to be there. There's a lot of debate about what they actually achieved. I've heard it described as the greatest display of public morality that the world has ever seen on the day that millions of people all around the world marched. But did it actually achieve? Did it stop them doing anything? You'll have people say that it stopped them attacking Iran as freely as they might have tried otherwise. But debating it 10 years on in the Parliament, what do you think was the point behind that? Because it was raised in the debate that some people thought it was a rather cynical move by the SNP to look kind of more statesmanly before the announcement for the referendum. I'm not convinced about that. What do you make of it, Stuart?
Okay. I marched in Glasgow with 100,000 other people against the Iraq War. It was particularly poignant for me because I was close friends with a young lady from Baghdad who's very naturalised here. She's living in Leith. And it was a very personal march for me. And yes, I was very angry, very, very angry. I'm not sure. I didn't see the debate, unfortunately, but I did recognise that, of course, it was being described by the Labour Party in particular, but all the opposition parties as rather a waste of space. They just don't want to talk about it, of course. I mean, the Labour Party in Scotland has blood on its hands.
I'm forced to agree with that analysis, but I don't know what you make of it, Andrew.
Yeah, well, I mean, in answer to your starting question, maybe I can begin there. I think that it was, yes, in some ways quite a calculated move by the SNP, in addition to the debate on Trident, in addition to the discussion of this bedroom tax. All of those things just appeared in a speech made by Alex Salmond about an hour ago now at the SNP conference. It was definitely a coordinated move by the SNP, but actually fair enough. I mean, the arguments from the Labour Party folk in the debate about why it shouldn't be discussed ranged a bit. Some of them argued that we should be talking about bread and butter issues in inverted commas, the inevitable, Pan-Am and Butter-Am, which is about, we should be talking about jobs for apprenticeships and whatnot. I don't think that our Parliament should necessarily limit itself to expressing opinions on things that are within the Parliament's power. I think it's appropriate and right to air these public concerns. But also, the other argument you got from some Labour MSPs was that it's illegitimate because this is an attempt by the Scottish Government and its supporters to politicise war dead, to politicise a past event 10 years ago for constitutional means. And my response to that would be, Well, this is the reality of British foreign policy in the last 10 years. And it's relevant to our calculation about independence, and it's totally legitimate to talk about it. The idea that people killed in war and wars launched by political institutions, elected political institutions, and endorsed by both Holyrood and Westminster, we should remember 10 years ago, the idea that those are not pertinent calculations for Scots, considering how they might vote, is absurd. It's absolutely absurd. It's the reality of British foreign policy. Not the whole reality, but, as you say, a particularly blood-stained and absolutely dismal reality. And I think Jenny Mara may be right. I mean, maybe right insofar as she was saying that Salmon's discussion of it was strategic with a view to the Constitution, but absolutely right, in my view, to raise it and to talk about it.
I mean, it's a past event, but it also has current consequences. The event started in the past, but the crisis in Iraq is ongoing. The disastrous state of things there, I mean, no one's suggesting it was a land of milk and honey before, but the absolute disaster that they've unleashed by currently active members of Parliament and members in this campaign, I think it's perfectly right to bring it up.
I think the problem is, of course, that within the Labour Party, the Scottish Labour Party, are a large number of people whose views on the Iraq war would be exactly the same as mine. And yet, the problem with the Scottish Labour Party is that these people are not allowed to speak up, not in public in any case. And that's the great shame. In fact, this is the great shame of Scotland, is the appalling hypocrisy of the Scottish Labour Party on all issues. Bedroom tax, workfare, almost any topic you like. And I'm completely surprised that there are so many people, friends of mine, that are still in that party.
I thought it was interesting, actually, just on that topic about the arguments made by Joanne Lamont and other Labour MSPs in that Iraq debate. What was quite interesting was that they didn't really attempt to defend their position. They didn't attempt to defend their choice. I mean, Joanne Lamont didn't defend her vote 10 years ago to support this war. Her argument seemed to be essentially, this was an issue about which reasonable people could reasonably differ, and if things didn't work out quite how I planned, then you shouldn't judge me terribly badly because I entered it with a good heart and with fear and trembling. That seemed to be her argument. Actually, one of the better performances was put in my view, by John Lamont, who is a Borders Tory, who went full out, said, no, this is justified. This war in Iraq was justified as a battle against tyranny, and I support it now. And I don't agree with him, but he put the case in a full-voiced way, and I thought that was pretty brave, firstly, and sort of secondly quite admirable, as opposed to this rather sort of footery justification which a rather havering Joanne Lamont seemed to put out.
Well, what did you think of Salmon saying that, the reason for the debate is that so that this kind of thing never happens again? Now, I think the word never is a bit strong, mistakes are always made, but I think it is very important to consider what would the foreign policy of an independent Scotland be, and this is another reason why I think the debate's perfectly acceptable to have about this past disaster or current disaster. I don't think an independent Scotland would be so quick to be saber rattling around the world as the United Kingdom, and for me that's one of the good reasons for an independent Scotland.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, we're in a situation where we complain about, Trident, for example, the entire nuclear defence capacity of the United Kingdom sits 30 miles from Glasgow, Scotland's major city. That's a big problem for most Scots. The question of the Iraq war was totally unpopular right across the UK. I don't think it was, there were 1 million people marching in London at the same time. But they're in our face. And as I say, I'm sitting here I voted Labour almost all my life. And I'm just so disappointed in the Labour Party.
Can we be a bit more prescriptive on this? Because it's not a discussion I've heard very much. How would you envision the future foreign policy of an independent Scotland?
I'm definitely of the Leslie Riddick persuasion. I'm on the Nordic direction. I really do think that would be a great opportunity. An independent Scotland would probably look north to our friends, the Nordic nations. And I maybe it's a bit utopian to think that way, but I think we could take a possible future defence policy of an independent Scotland by looking at what the Scandinavian countries do.
You know that haggis is banned in America. I think we should launch the invasion force to force, very much the way the American Empire often does. They open up new markets, so we should launch the invasion force of America to open up the haggis market.
Quite Hawaii. Do you think we should start there? Like the Americans annexed Hawaii quite late on, didn't they? And dethroned their monarch. Maybe we should reinvent that. I don't imagine haggis is particularly a food you'd appreciate in a kind of warm, soothing Hawaii environment somehow.
Haggis ice lolly. You get haggis. You get haggis pakora.
Look, look, guys. I had a big burn supper in my house this year. 16 of us, and there were leftovers, of course, including haggis. And then so I made a big pot of soup, haggis soup, and then froze about 16 portions of that. I must admit, I'm a bit tired of it now.
Andrew, what would you like to see happen?
In an independent Scotland? Well, it's a difficult question because it's a complex question. I think we can talk quite easily about some of these big ticket items. We can talk about Iraq wars. We can talk about NATO interventions. We can talk about the extent to which industry, for example, in Scotland would serve military industrial goals. And actually, if you look at the reality as opposed to just the rhetoric of Nordic foreign policy and military policy in terms of military hardware. I mean, the Swedes, although not part of NATO, make a fair buck out of selling aeroplanes and things to various regimes abroad. So I think that speaks to, in one sense, the rather compromised and complex picture, because international governance and all of these structures is not just a matter of war. It's about lots of very, very dull, practical, rather specific things, about diplomacy, about making spaces in Scotland, say, to discuss dialogues of peace. I know that's something which the SNP have been kind of keen on, trying to use an independent Scotland in the manner of sort of Norway or in the manner of Denmark and the Borgen series to broker peace abroad and such like, you know. But I think the good thing, as you were saying, Michael, about an independent Scotland's foreign policy is that it would not be encumbered by this British post-empire vision of grandeur and responsibility. I mean, people often say that the Iraq War is a salutary lesson for people in Britain and would mean that the public never again will be convinced to engage in expeditions.
Right.
But it's not true. I mean, all you have to do to discern the fact that it isn't true is not listen to Westminster, is not listen to the Defence Minister or the Prime Minister, but just listen to BBC Question Time. And the number of people on there, the ordinary punters who come up and sort of cavalierly suggest we should invade, drop bombs, or otherwise militarily harass a disliked regime abroad is truly astonishing. I don't think the enthusiasm for sort of projections of British military power have in any way diminished as a result of the Iraq War. And I think that an independent Scotland would, of its essence, because it would be unencumbered by these British Empire type stories, would be free of some of those desires to intervene abroad and free perhaps of some of that cavalier spirit.
Andrew, I think you're right. I mean, because I think historically, you know, from perhaps 50 years ahead, historians will be really describing this period as the loss of empire. It's that there's still that dreadful, they've not come to terms with it. You're living there, presumably in Oxford, and you'll understand the Southern English psyche. I know it very well. I've lived down there myself for 20 years, and I love it, to be honest. However, I do understand this. It's amazing when you live in the south of England and you don't realise how much the English hate the French. They're always going on about the frogs. They hate the French more than they hate anybody else. And how long ago was it since they last had a war with the French? But it's the loss of empire that London has yet to come to terms with. It is one of the big problems we have. You know, overlays almost everything else that we're talking about when it comes to defence policy.
Well, it must be hard for them, a nation that lost an empire and gained Chris Moyles. But
oh, that's harsh.
Ooh,
I mean, I must say, in defence of my English friends and colleagues, I haven't found what Stewart found. I don't find a high level of anti-froggery, if I can put it that way.
Well, it's a convenient. You know how us Scots are always accused of supporting anybody but England, and to some extent, in the south of England for sure, there is this. That automatically they just it's a dinner party racism. It's not serious, but they love to pick on the French.
I love that expression, dinner party racism. Okay, and I think we should maybe move on to our last topic, which brings us back home, which is